It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I know the anxiety that comes with watching a loved one struggle with a nonlinear path. This podcast was created to fight back against the narrow picture of success painted by social media. Each week, we share authentic stories from people who changed course, failed, and ultimately found their own definition of success. These are the stories you need to hear to prove that changing your mind is common and you don't have to have it all figured out at 18. If you're a parent or if you're a young adult looking for a little proof, you're home. Now let's get into today's episode. If you'd like to explore how I can help your young adult, you can schedule a free consultation through my website link in the show notes. Today, my guest is Dr. Eric Baudouin. I'm going to call him Eric because honestly, although he definitely has letters that he has earned that warrant being respected that way, he's a very approachable person, and I just really have so much love and respect for him. He's a licensed psychologist. He's the executive director at Cornerstones of Maine and the owner of Roberto Young Adult Transitions. He lives in Portland, Maine with his wife and their dog, Kenji. He enjoys playing music, romanticizing the 90s, and collecting more Ryobi batteries than he'll ever use. So in case it's also not super obvious, he's just got a wicked sense of humor, and he is a Mainer through and through, which is just kind of a fun fact. So you'll be glad you tuned in. Let's not wait any longer. Here's Eric. Okay, Eric, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast finally. Thank you for carving out time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited. Okay, so let's just dive right in. Why don't you tell our listeners, where did you grow up and what was the messaging that you were getting about what you were supposed to be doing after high school?
I grew up in South China, Maine, and Central Maine, for those of you who aren't familiar with our call to fame in Central Maine. And I was the child of a blue-collar family. My dad's an electrician, and the idea was that he and his two brothers owned an electrical contracting business they inherited from their father, my grandfather. And the idea for as long as I could remember was that I would take over that business. And that seemed like a good enough idea to me until I worked with my dad for a summer when I was, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, and I hated it. It was not for me. And I think that was always the idea because I was a pretty bad student. My grades were abysmal. After we shifted from like the satisfactory, non-satisfactory report card system to actual letter grades, it was pretty downhill immediately for me. And so the idea was, it was never spoken directly to me, but there was a sort of inference I made as a kid, which was like, all right, I'm dumb. And so I'll just do what I can to get by. And I think that I didn't feel great about that, but I kind of accepted it until we took our first standardized testing. I forget which grade we do that in, maybe fifth grade. And I scored among the highest in the class. It was a surprise to everyone, including myself. And then my parents shifted their mentality. Their statement was now we know you're just lazy. And the fateful L word. And then things got worse. I felt great for a second after that. And then I felt worse because I still didn't do well. I still got terrible grades. And now there was this discrepancy. I just suddenly, I had this advantage, but I was like defunct. So I must have been fucking it up in some way. And I really internalized that I was broken in some major way. People were not shy about reminding me that if I just tried harder, I would do great.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot that I want to just kind of unpack there. One, which is here you are kind of like in the pipeline to be the next generation to take over this family business. You kind of shadow your dad for a summer and realize, ooh, not for me, coupled with these experiences where like the academic performance in a day in and day out is probably not super inviting or interesting or not lighting you up. But what does light you up is when you do well on some like standardized assessments, which then, like you said, there's just a huge discrepancy, which which then becomes this internalized narrative or identity of school sucks, I'm not smart, and then kind of like carries you forward to where you are today, which is not an electrician and definitely not somebody that's dumb. So at some point, something must have shifted. Where did it shift?
Dumb still sometimes, but yeah, so not as often as maybe it used to be. But it shifted in a number of different ways. It's a long story, so I'll try to compact it here. Firstly, I think that no one asked me the right questions in high school about why I wasn't doing well, why I wasn't paying attention, why I wasn't persevering, why I wasn't doing my homework. I didn't have the emotional social wherewithal to tell them. I didn't know. I didn't have any self-awareness about that. So what they tried was like, he just must need more summer school, more homework, more tutoring. And that was nice of them to try, but none of it worked. And in retrospect, I don't fault my parents for this. They didn't know, and I certainly didn't tell them. But what was going on was that I was desperately lonely. I was an only child. I was constantly starving for interpersonal connection and didn't have very much of it. And so every time I was in class, I was focused on the person next to me and writing notes and talking to them and trying to make friends and being rejected and neglected and all the things that come with the woes of high school. And that was my priority. It wasn't to pay attention. It was I had a void that was so empty that I couldn't hear the teacher over that void,
Wow.
And so I had an abysmal GPA in high school. And then I told my mom, after I tried that summer of working with my dad, I told my parents that I wanted to go to college. And I knew I wanted to be a therapist. I thought I wanted to be a therapist based on what my understanding of what therapy was in high school, which was admittedly primitive, because my friends used to call me and tell me about how their boyfriends broke up with them. And I would say, they're there, no problem. And I thought I should get paid for this. And it turns out it's actually not so different, but I knew I wanted to do that. And so I told my parents I want to go to college. And they very sweetly were like, oh, that's great. Here's the thing, bud. Your GPA is really bad and you're going to have to apply, and you haven't taken any extracurriculars and you're not a very attractive candidate. So we're happy to support you, but good luck. And then I didn't apply. And I remember my mom hounding me often, as parents do. And she was like, hey, bud, those deadlines are coming up. You're going to want to do something. And I remember in my mind, Joanna, thinking it was magical thinking, textbook magical thinking. I remember thinking yeah, I need to do this at some point. It won't get done unless I do it. But that's a problem for future Eric. I'll do that later. And the deadlines came and went, and I still had some sense that I don't know, it'll work out somehow. Yeah. It'll get done. And then my mom came to me one day and she was like, all right, Eric, I've done something I should not have done. I've applied to college for you. And my mom, Joanna, she did the applications. She wrote the essays. She got the transcripts. She did everything. And so that was my first reinforcement of you don't have to do anything and it'll be okay. It was a horrible lesson that I learned, right? I'm very grateful that it happened, and to her, bless her heart, for doing it, but it totally taught me the wrong thing. And then it gets worse, Joanna. And then she applied to UMA, USM, University of Orono, and UNE, University of New England. And most of these schools are not hard to get into. UNE is the hardest, at least it was at the time. And I got my first rejection letter from USM, and I was like, okay, all right, makes sense. Then I got a rejection from Orono, which was all right, that's kind of a safety school, but okay. And then I got a rejection from UMA, and I was like, oh shit, everyone gets into UMA. And then I was like, okay, well, I'm not getting into UNE. And so I was already thinking all right, I guess I'm going to work for a year or semester and then reapply, maybe take a class, bring my GPA up. And I was starting to, there was something starting to happen in my mind, which is I was starting to learn a lesson. And then I got the letter from UNE that was hey, you got in. And I was totally perplexed. And so was my family. And UNE is a great school. What I found out later was that they had 100% acceptance rate that year. And they had some financial crisis that semester. And they were like, fuck it, just let everyone in. So I got reinforced a second time, right? You don't have to do anything and it'll all work out. So then I got to college and my parents were like, all right, Eric, you've gotten lucky twice. You need to not screw around now. You need to actually get good grades. And I remember having this conversation with myself, like, they're right. I actually like need to use my powers not for evil for once here. And so I started going to class, and it didn't take long for me to go like, all right, I've cracked the code here. I feel like I can go to this many classes. I can go to this, do this many assignments, and I'll squeeze by with a solid C minus. And that way I can maximize my time to try to make friends and fill my social cup, which of course was still feeling empty. I failed the entire semester. I got 4 Fs my first semester. And I called my parents and I waited for them to fix it. And they were like, sorry, pal, we can't, even if we wanted to, we can't and shouldn't do anything here. So UNE put me on academic probation. They said, if you get another F next semester, we'll kick you out. And I ended up taking the easiest classes I possibly could the following semester. One of them was drawing 1. And the head of the art department, he's now the head of the art department. He wasn't at the time. Super, super nice guy. Picture like a Bob Ross type, tall, lanky, fro situation. Extremely talented sketch artist. Must have had a chip on his shoulder. Probably was expecting students like me looking for drawing 1 being easy. So he made it incredibly laborious. We had to do a drawing every day of the semester. We had a notebook that we had to buy, and there had to be, every page had to be filled. I didn't, of course, do any of it until the last night. And I was scribbling stick figures on every page the night before. I hadn't learned anything, obviously. And but I did do most of the assignments, not all of them, turned in most of them. But I skipped most of the classes still after all of this because I hadn't learned my lesson. And I got an email from him toward the end of the semester, which was like, hey, bud, listen, I got to fail you because you haven't come to most of the classes. And I was like, please, please, please don't fail me. I turned in most of the assignments. Isn't that good enough? And he said, well, no, everyone else came to class. So I don't understand why you would think that. And I was like, okay, good point. I was like, well, do me a favor. Just meet with me. Let's talk about it. If there was any one thing I had gained through all of my years of shiesty kind of behavior, was like my silver tongue could get me out of a few situations. So I was like, let me try that. So he agreed to meet with me, kind fellow. And I set up a time with him for 11 a.m. the next day, and I slept through it. I overslept. And I woke up and I emailed him. I can't even remember what I emailed him. I'm sure I gave him some excuse. My grandmother died for the 3rd time, probably. And I was like, can we reschedule? And he was like, obviously not. And I was like, I'm begging you, you don't understand. I'm on academic probation. They're going to kick me out of school if I fail this class. Like, help me out. And he found it in his heart to say, okay, let's schedule again for tomorrow, 2 p.m. You can't miss that. I said, okay. And Joanna, I slept through it. And at the time, even then, in my primitive college boy mind, I had my first understanding, I think, of what self-sabotage really looked like. You have to really try to mess that up. I didn't even email him. I sprinted across campus to the art building where he was. And I remembered like it was yesterday. He was sitting on a stool, shaking his head as I came in out of breath. And I was wearing pants that were like 3 inches too long for me because I didn't know how to shop for myself. And I was like, I know I'm a mess. I won't make excuses. I guess I just wanted to show up and say I'm sorry and say thank you for the opportunity. And if you can find it in your heart to pass me, that would be great. But I don't expect it at this point. And I walked away again, starting to learn a lesson of like, wow, Eric, you really like you might want to pay attention to this. It's time. And then I checked my grades and he passed me. And I know. So I was reinforced yet again that it would just work out. So this continued throughout really probably 3/4 of my career in academia and in undergrad. And I had to make a long story short, a couple more experiences, similarly, some cheating, put on academic probation again, more skipping class, more half-assed assignments. And then eventually a professor I had in the psych department, he was just filling in actually for another professor who was on sabbatical, also worked with the main PD. He was like a hostage negotiator. I thought he was a really cool guy. He had a class on like how to recognize when someone's lying. I thought it was really neat. I was super into it. And I remember asking him when he was the one who caught me cheating. And I was like, hey, I think I need some therapy. Can I do therapy with you? And he's like, I can't do that. It's conflict of interest. But he was like, go to the community counseling center here on campus. They'll hook you up. And I did. But before I did, he was like, he had sat me down and he had a sort of unofficial conversation with me. And he was like, here's what you're doing, dude. He was like, you're totally petrified about like growing up and mourning the loss of your adolescence and your childhood. And so you're sabotaging this because you like don't want to grow up. And unfortunately, life's been teaching you that that's okay. And so he was like, so I'm going to fail you for cheating. And it'll be the first time that you actually have to face that. And it was a huge wake up call for me, seeing that F and not getting bailed out of it. There's a lot more, but I should pause there. Gone on for a while.
Well, and I'm just, obviously for folks who are listening, it's unusual for me to be quiet this long. And which that's actually telling, because I'm also over here, it's not that I'm not reacting, because I am very attuned to your story, but I'm definitely having these reactive responses when you said like those situations of like slept through the meeting, right? Like, was supposed to fail the class, but he passed me, like all of these moments where I'm like over here cringing because I'm like, that's the shit that our clients deal with all the time.
Yeah.
And you have quite the lived experience. Yeah. So for the sake of time, and also quite honestly, I think we need to hold some cards close to our chest. So let's leave something for the listener wanting more, especially if they're going to connect with you. How the heck did you get from this kid, right? Really, because that's what you are still in this moment. That's what you just talked about. You still very much are in this delayed adolescent state of not wanting to like lean into adulthood, take ownership, accountability, all the things. How do you go from failing a class from a professor that you really like in a class that you're really curious about, and all of a sudden this is the beginning of learned lessons, to where you are today, which I want to make sure we have an opportunity to kind of spotlight that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I stayed every summer to make up all my failed classes and low grades. I had another professor at UNE, Linda Morrison, love her to this day, saw that I was interested, but that I was a mess in one of her classes, and had me meet her at her therapy office in Kennebunkport. And she pulled out a big whiteboard of like, if you want to be a therapist, you have to go to grad school, which I didn't know at the time. And she was like, here are all the options, here are all the degrees, here's how much they cost, here's how long they take, and here's how to do it. And she was like, and here's the GPA that you'll need. And so after that moment, I was like, okay, I really want this. So I have to make up these classes. And so I made them up, and I'll never forget the first moments I sat in front of my computer to actually write a paper, to not adjust the margins, to not change the font size, to not go online and buy a paper. I remember sitting and staring at my screen for what felt like hours, being like, how do people do this? People just write these papers like fools? Like how is this possible? This is going to take forever. It felt literally impossible to me, Joanna. And then I got, a sentence down, which felt like torture. And I was like, oh my God, that took an hour for me to do that one line. This is going to take, I can't do this. And then I don't know, I was faced with parents who weren't rescuing with me, teachers who weren't rescuing me anymore. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'll write a second line. And so I wrote a second line. I was like, oh, that took not an hour that time to write the second line. And then suddenly I had a paragraph and a page and 5 pages. And that was a revelation, Joanna. Like the amount of time it actually took me to write that paper after I got through all the initial negative self-talk and hopelessness was a revelation. And I was like, okay, I can do this. And that started it. And then what sustained it was I got nice feedback. My professors were like, oh, you're a good writer. Like you clearly can think good. And they were like, but you're too smart for your own good, and you're overly confident here, and you're whatever. And so they helped me edit. But I raised my GPA to something relatively competitive. I applied to grad school. I got in, and then I made a bunch of friends, maybe for like the first time in my life. And I made some toward the end of college too, but different type. Older friends felt different than younger friends, and I had an experience with them, which was like, hey, Eric, you're too inauthentic. We don't know who you are. These were also graduate, clinicians in training, so that helps them see me, and it helped me find my authenticity. So now suddenly I was balancing my academic responsibilities, which I had learned toward the end of undergrad, with figuring out how to be with people in a way that was actually vulnerable, which I hadn't really had a lot of practice socially up to that point at all, and came to it late. So those two things together shaped me to be really primed for working with young adults with delayed independence, because I was obviously that at heart, and still am really at heart, is the short answer.
So what is your exact role right now? And let's again, we're kind of alluding to it. We both work with young adults, but what's the organization that you actually work for? Because I also think we just need to even kind of name it, right? Folks listen to this and sometimes they're curious to not just hear about the guests, but to also learn about their associations. And so give us the elevator pitch. What is your job title, Eric, and who are you working for?
Sure. Yeah, I'm a licensed psychologist here in Portland, Maine. And I am the executive director at Cornerstones of Maine, a young adult transitional living program, residential, failure to launch. We're trying to get away from that term. It's a little negative. People who are stuck. And I also own Rubetto Young Adult Transitions, and I'm the executive director there as well. Rubetto Transitions is similar to Cornerstones in that it's residential transitional living for young adults, but we focus on much more neurodivergent presentation. So we appeal to certain specific neurotypes and sort of tailor our programming accordingly and try to be affirming in all the ways that we need to be affirming, but not affirming in the things that aren't working.
Yeah, I imagine that's also a reflection too of your own lived experiences, right?
Yeah.
Where it's things ways in which I can not enable, and also not avoid.
Yeah.
And so just a safe space to have those learned life lessons in real time.
Exactly.
Okay. So we'll make sure that we have links in the show notes for anybody to actually learn a little bit more about Cornerstones or Rubetto. So again, folks, thank you for checking that out. And also we'll have Eric's contact information because I also said it, right? Don't give us all the details, even though honestly, I probably could extend this interview for another hour and just easily sit back, throwing popcorn in my mouth, listening to you give all of the details about your emerging adult journey, because it would be entertaining. I would thoroughly enjoy that. Okay, but here we are. Let me ask this loaded question because I ask it for everybody
Sure.
That's on this show. Now that we've kind of heard where you grew up, kind of the inner workings of your social depleted self, the academic kind of mismatch, and then how that was internalized for your self-worth or worthiness in general, right? And then how that played out with your family, culturally, into academics, all of the things, right? I'm going to stop summarizing, but now that we've heard what you're doing now, right, with the letters after your name and all that, before and after, do you see yourself as successful?
Yeah, I do. I think I took a long time for me to be able to say that and not feel fraudulent about it. Maybe that's a thing a lot of people feel, but I still had these moments after I graduated from school where I put off licensure and I put off taking my test and all of these things. And that was a callback to this old pattern in me, which is, if I don't pass this test and get licensed, then I won't really be responsible for all these people's lives. And so I put it off for as long as I could. And so, yeah, I think there will always be a part of me that wonders, if it's all an act and if people see it that way or if they don't. But yeah, when I'm in my wise mind, as Martha would say, I see myself as successful. I live with my incredibly smart, talented, beautiful wife, Gwen, and our dog. And we just turned 40 and trying to decide if now is the right time in the middle of our lives to start having kids. I already have 40 of them between Cornerstones and Rubetto. So to try to decide if we want to add one more. And I feel very grateful for the success that I have. And for my parents and my friends, even though I struggled to be understood when I was growing up in those formative years, they really supported me in ways that led me to this point. I don't know that I would do any of it differently.
Yep. Okay. Well, that answers the question that I was going to ask, if you could give any feedback or kind of advice, but knowing that you are saying that, right? I wouldn't change anything. No
I would say this, Joanna.
Okay, go for it.
Pardon me for interrupting. I would say if you notice that you've tried all the things that the books have told you to do as a parent and it's not working, the tutors, the come to Jesus moments, the punishments, the tech losses, I'll speak for myself instead of speaking for them. I needed someone to say, hey, I don't believe you that you're okay. What's really going on? And then when I say again, no, really, I'm okay, I needed someone to be like, I can tell you're not. So, and if someone I think had persisted with me in that way, we probably would have gotten somewhere sooner.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is fantastic advice for parents that are listening, because that is the bulk of the audience here. And I think that also speaks to the reminder too of like when, we are so good at masking, especially young adults, and it's not intentional. Sometimes you just don't even know. Like, I think I am fine, but nobody's really taken the opportunity to say like, no, for real. Stop and think what's really going on. And if you can't put it to words, then that's also a part of kind of growth right there, is having the opportunity to kind of explore, having that self-awareness. And a part of that is just being more emotionally and mentally attuned to what actually is healthy versus what's avoidant. But anyways, I feel like we could talk more. We're just going to table it. Eric, thank you again for taking some time, for being a guest on the show. We'll make sure we have all of the links, like I said, in the show notes so folks can contact you. And I'm just going to do a call out for anybody that's listening. I mean, if you were even remotely captured by Eric kind of talking about his experience, this guy is awesome to talk to. So literally email him or call him. Just take the opportunity to learn more, because if you can picture who he is professionally and how that also manifests with the young adults or the clients that he's working with, that relationship or impact is there. So reach out.
Thank you for the kind words, Joanna.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guest for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email joanna@lilleyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lilleyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.